Hi everybody, I'm Wessel and this is my guide to building the ultimate stereo system, episode 2, the electronic enclosures. Alright, so I've decided to go rack mount on these amplifiers, mostly because most of my other audio equipment is already rack mount and it's a very nice, neat and robust type of system. Alright, let's get started. So for my enclosure, I decided I need to have heat sinks. And these things are kind of like walls for an enclosure. So I had a couple of plates laser cut. I had them laser cut and powder coated, so they've got a nice durable finish on them. So that will be the bottom. The heat sinks will fit on like that to form the side walls of the enclosure. I've got another piece of plate laser cut, which will form the rear part of the enclosure, and then the final part would be the front of the enclosure, forming the flange where the rack mount will fit into the rack. On the front plate I've got 4 holes where screws would fit through onto the heat sinks. I've got a hole in the bottom that will act as a bracket or a space for a bracket to connect to. And then I've got a hole for a power indication light. On the rear plate I've got the same 4 holes to attach them to the heatsink. I've also got the hole for attaching it to the bracket, and I've got 2 cutouts for terminals. On the power supply, the one would be for the mains supply and the other one would be for the output power. And on the amplifier, the one would be for the speaker terminals and the other one would be for the terminals going to the power supply. On the bottom plate I've got 4 holes for attaching the plate to the heat sinks, 2 holes for the brackets corresponding to the holes on the front and rear plate, and I also have these ventilation holes mainly for the transformer but also for any other electronics that's going to be housed in the enclosure. So these specific heat sinks come in very long pieces and I had them cut to the right size that I require, but you can see it left lots of burrs on the heatsink. So I'm just going to use a file and clean it up. I've got a nice small file so I can get into all the little crevices and clean up all the burrs. Now this is quite a labor intensive part, so don't rush it. I'm turning heat sink upside down to also do the other side of the fins. Yeah, and I'm starting to get a little bit out of breath now, but still more filing in between all the fins. I'm using a bigger file to do the outside edges because the bigger file is definitely more efficient and I don't have a space issue getting it in anywhere. Now that all the sharp edges have been filed off, I'm going to use a vibrating sander and just sand off all the marks left by the saw. And that's it. One clean heatsink. Now that the heatsinks have been properly deburred, I can go ahead and measure them out to be drilled, to be mounted on the plates. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark one side of the heatsink with a permanent marker to indicate that that would be the side that's going to be fixed to the bottom plate. The reason for this is these heatsinks hasn't been cut extremely accurately, so I'm going to do all my measurements from one point, ensuring that when I build the final unit it will be nice and straight. I'm using a combination angle to do the measurements, which makes it nice and easy and also gives me repeatable measurements. And I'm going to go and mark it with a scriber because these faces won't be seen in the final enclosure. So before you drill, you want to make sure that you punch the holes exactly where you've marked them. If you just go and drill them, you've always got a chance of the drill running around and then missing the exact point where you've marked them. If you punch them beforehand, your drill will definitely drill exactly where you've marked it. So we've now come to the drilling and tapping part, which is always a bit of a tricky thing, especially in aluminium. You've got a big chance of breaking either your drill or your tap in the block of aluminium. So you have to be careful. One thing is to use some sort of lubrication. I'm using general lubrication here, but you can also get fancy aluminium specific tapping fluid. But this has been good enough for me. So while you're drilling, you want to make sure that you don't continue drilling and eventually clog either your drill bit or your tap. So continuously bring the drill bit out again, make sure that all the shavings are off before taking it down again. There you go, one clean hole. Alright, so now we've come to the really tricky part, tapping the heatsink. So I've drilled 3.3mm holes so that I can use a 4mm tap. Now at the risk of sounding like a sex therapist, remember, always lube, and you're going to do the same thing as we've done with the drill. You're going to take your tap in and then at regular intervals we'll have to take it out again to make sure that you don't have any shavings that get stuck inside the hole. Clean off all the shavings, clean the tip of the tap and carry on. This is especially important if you're tapping a blind hole like I'm doing here. So the shavings can't fall out in the bottom of the heatsink, so you have to manually take them out. As you get closer to the bottom, do not force your tap. You can never tap as deep as what the hole is, and that's because there's no thread in the beginning of the tap. Well, there is a little bit, but not enough for a screw to actually go in. So don't force your tap. You can feel it's going to get to a point, it's going to give you some resistance. Stop and take it out. Alright, I think that's it. I can feel there's definitely more resistance now than before. So that means we're at the bottom of the hole. And that's how you tap aluminium without breaking your tap. And the same thing applies for tapping the sheet steel. I don't use any lubrication. I don't use a tapping wrench. I use a normal electrical drill. Hold it in and forward, tap in, tap it in a bit, put it in reverse, turn it out. Now, all the preparation is done, and it's time for the exciting part of today's show, and that's the assembly. And this is really where all the effort of drilling and tapping is going to pay off. So I'm going to start with the rear plate, and first of all, I'm just going to install the two terminals. One terminal there, one terminal there, and because of the drilling and tapping, it's just a simple matter of installing the screws, tightening them up. No nuts required, just screw it straight into the plate. And that's it, terminals installed. Put the heatsinks down with the tapped holes on top, sort of line it up like that. Screw in and tighten. Now I'm only temporarily assembling this enclosure because obviously once I start installing the electronics into it, I'll have to disassemble it to drill and tap on the heatsink some more depending on what section I'm building. Simple as that. 4 screws in and it's already starting to look like an enclosure. Gonna mount the rear plate now. And finally, gonna do the front plate. Alright, so final item, I'm just gonna install the power indication light. And that's it. One enclosure ready. 4 more to go. Well, thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe if you want to follow the rest of the project. I'll see you next time.